Hey y'all, it's Dark Sugar Podcast coming to you fresh out the packet with everything black. Dark Sugar.
Hey y'all, it is Kiana with Dark Sugar Podcast. Whew, it's been a minute. It's been longer than a minute. I appreciate everyone's patience and encouragement and feedback as I slowly crawl back into the podcast space. I did post a video about, was that like a month ago, 2 months ago, about why I have been away from podcasting, my feelings about podcasting, and slowly moving back into the game of podcasting. I initially did want to touch on that during this episode, but I will direct you guys back to the video on my page if you want to find out why, because I feel like the more important thing is that I'm back and we're about to talk about some shit, girl. Okay. So this is the really interesting thing. Back up. On my podcast, a lot of you guys connected with me when I started talking about narcissism. There were so many of you that hadn't heard the word, but had been in so many experiences with people who had high narcissistic traits. My view on narcissism has definitely expanded in a way, and I think it's a testament to my self-development and my growth, and I'm really excited to share with you guys my new just the expansion on what I've learned, because so many of you guys were very supportive during that time of my life when I did that narcissism episode. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you could tell I was going through some shit with people in my life who were highly narcissistic, and that's what inspired me to research narcissism and kind of do like a deep dive into it and do so many episodes. I think I did maybe 3 episodes about my experience, and I did a couple videos and things like that, and it was very refreshing, healing, releasing for me to do that. But then I felt like a couple months later, I was still kind of stuck in this narcissist rabbit hole of condemning a lot of people that were in my life as narcissists. And my mom, who I live with, and so I was living with her at the time, she kind of, she had her own experience with a man who was narcissistic in her life, maybe like 2 to 3 years prior. And when she was going through her experience, I was so, like, she would be like, oh my God, he's a narcissist. Oh my God. And I was kind of like, oh, okay. And, I hadn't looked up the word. I didn't really know what she was talking about. I couldn't really feel it, but she definitely went through her moment where and I feel like a lot of victims of narcissistic abuse go through that, where they have this like aha moment, and it almost feels like you're out of touch with reality for a little bit, because you're so shook. There's so much information on narcissism. And so when I was going through my deep dive, and when I was in the rabbit hole, my mom was kind of looking down the rabbit hole like, okay, like, you can come out now. Like, you're really far down there. And she would kind of tease me, and she'd be like, well, everyone to you is a narcissist. And I'm like, no, that's not true. So it was a combination of, did I feel like everyone in my life was a narcissist? No. But I did have a release of highly narcissistic people in my life whose narcissism was impeding on our growth as friends. So that's what I don't want to, diminish or minimize what I was feeling. But at the same time, I do think what my mom was seeing was, I do think she was kind of right, because I went through this phase where I was pointing out narcissism in other people in a very judgmental, non-loving, non-compassionate, I was definitely in victim mode. And, I do recognize that, okay, I was a victim at some point in my life. These people did these things to me and, projected onto me in their own way. And was it right? No. I don't mind. I feel like some people have an issue with being labeled a victim or called a victim in some points in their life. But I can definitely admit, like, what I was going through wasn't my fault. I didn't know what was going on. It was very hurtful, blah, blah, blah. So where I am now is I look at my posts. I look at other people talking about narcissism. I look at narcissistic abuse groups, and I'm going to talk about these groups very lightly because I know they can go into... Okay, let me back up again. So there's a range of narcissism, right? There's healthy narcissism in the middle where it can be, a little difficult and impede on interpersonal relationships. And then there's someone who probably has narcissistic personality disorder where they're just popping off and they don't really give a fuck and they pretty much destroy everything in their path. Now, I had a relationship with someone who I believe, now am I a psychiatrist? Am I a therapist? Am I a psychologist? No. So I have no credentials to diagnose with anybody with anything, but I can tell you, I believe that I've had one encounter with one person who I believe had narcissistic personality disorder. Now, the other people in my life, they had high narcissistic traits, but I was not compassionate. I was not loving towards them. I was very judgmental. Let me break this down. So, narcissism is a defense mechanism that is formulated in childhood. Now, there can be different scenarios of why this would come up. And I'm talking about high narcissistic traits because in my research, which I did see at the time of me going down this rabbit hole, but it didn't apply to my narrative. So I was like, I'm not going to really talk about that. But narcissism is definitely a scale. So on the scale, a lot of us, most humans, all humans, you could even go for that and say that have narcissistic traits. Now, they might be healthy. So like one narcissistic trait is... Now we're looking at, there are various definitions of narcissism. I'm looking at the baseline psychological definition of narcissism, which is just the absorption of self, caring about yourself, loving yourself, standing up for yourself, not letting people walk over you maybe, caring about what you look like. And then there's other traits that we all do this. Like sometimes you might puff yourself up a little bit, exaggerate on something that you're doing or something good that you're doing. You might, for a second, someone says that their feelings are hurt. You might be like, oh, I don't really care. What I'm feeling is more important. I've done that. Or you might feel super entitled to something that you feel like is yours. And you might have these blinders on like, oh, I deserve this and I don't really give a shit. And I just deserve it just cause and da-da-da-da. And you might be like kind of childish about it. I kind of went through that phase myself with my mom where I went through this little period where I didn't feel like I needed to pay rent. And I felt like a toddler. And I was like, I don't feel like I need to pay rent. I've been through so much. Da-da-da-da-da. Me. Not thinking about, okay, well, there's a recession about to, inflation's going on. There was a recession about to come. Your mom's not trying to be like weird. She actually could use the money for the rent. Like, no, I literally went through a phase where I felt so entitled. I did not want to pay her rent. And I could have made it a huge, big thing. But I recognized, oh my God, this is a narcissistic trait of mine where I feel entitled to things just because I feel like I've been through a lot. Right? So there are these little narcissistic traits that we can recognize in each other that, like I said, can be healthy, and don't have to be, they don't have to infringe upon our relationships. That's not what we're saying here. But also, they're found in most of us, all of us. And so I think we need to I've been really trying to work on having more compassion for people whose narcissistic traits are a little bit more obvious, because it's like, okay, having a strong self-regard of healthy narcissism, great. Recognizing your own needs, what you need, right? having an authentic self-concept and having emotional resilience. That's a positive sense of self, right? That's healthy narcissism, a healthy sense of self, okay? So I feel like narcissism becomes the narcissism that we want to talk about as a collective in society is when it starts to infringe upon our relationships and fuck up our relationships. And I totally understand that one. But here's my kind of like, oh, sorry guys, my charger fell out. What the okay. Why did it do that? Okay, there we go. So what I would love to challenge everyone to do is, and some people will be like, well, I can't do this because my baby dad is a narcissist and he tried to kill me and and he took my kids away. Okay, there are very extreme cases, so don't think I'm minimizing your narcissistic abuse experience if you have one by saying this or by talking about these things. I've never experienced that level. So I'm not trying to say that it's super easy and all you have to do is this. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is to view narcissism like a defense mechanism, okay? Because I got very caught up in the actions and not the why. I was kind of like, wow, this person is so narcissistic. They treated me this way. They put me down. They didn't care about me. You know, they lacked empathy here and here and here and here. And what's wrong with them? And why do they do that? And then I had to realize with the people that I was dealing with, one, they had at least one narcissistic parent, right? So they had their own experience with narcissistic abuse, because when you have a narcissistic parent, they're highly emotionally abusive, like on another level, and your sense of self is really fucked up because it's connected to your parent. They can either be an overly involved narcissist. I've seen both types of parents. I've seen parents that are overly involved, where they're like, my child is an extension of me. They pour themselves into their kids. They give them their kids what on the outside looks like a very enriching life experience. They expose them to a lot of amazing things. They want their kid, they want the best for their kids, but really they're trying to live their life through their children. And once their children turn however age they turn and they want to start doing their own thing, that's usually when the problem starts. And the parents like, how dare you become your own person? Like, who the hell do you think you are, you know? And then I've seen narcissistic parents who are very passive, who they're so into themselves, they kind of act like they don't have kids, and their children raise themselves. And again, they don't have their sense of self validated by their parent, who is the first person that does this for you. So I'm not saying you can't have a healthy sense of self if it's not validated by your parent, but if it's not checked and you're not tapped into it, and you're not aware that that's happened, it can be very difficult. It's an extra layer of healing that needs to take place for them, right? So for me, now I have that insight and I understand that. But when I was first diving into narcissism and narcissistic abuse, I was very judgmental towards these people. I was kind of like, well, I'm better than them because I wasn't like, that was my own form of narcissism coming out. I was like, I'm better than them because I don't have this going on in my head. And I felt like I went through this phase last year where you can call it a spiritual awakening of sorts, but I became very highly empathetic towards a lot of people in my life and towards a lot of people that I had labeled a narcissist in my life. And it's just really interesting because in one regard, you could say we're all narcissists, right? In our own way, but that's in society. That's not how we're using the term. That's a very general way of an objective way of looking at it. But then when you look at it, how a lot of people in the mental health industry use narcissism, there's a threshold, right? And when you cross that threshold, then you're labeled a narcissist. And that's usually when your interpersonal connections and relationships with people tend to suffer because of your unattended inner child. And I think that's the real base of it. Narcissists, people with high narcissistic tendencies that I've seen, their inner child is very, very exposed. It's like an open wound. So all these weird things that they do, people argue, do they know that they're doing it? Do they not know? I don't know. Like, I've met some narcissists where I actually don't think they know. I actually don't think they know what they're doing. I think to apply that consciousness to them, might stereotype them as evil. And then I think that leads into another disorder, which is being a sociopath or psychopath. I think that's, that might be a separate thing. But I do think it's possible to have these high narcissistic traits and not even know how you're affecting people. Because when you're trying to protect yourself, your inner child that you feel like is exposed, that you feel like is not validated, not good enough, all these things, you're on autopilot pretty much. And if you're on autopilot, you're usually unaware of what you are doing, correct? So I really came to have more compassion for myself and the people around me when I realized, wow, this narcissist is really trying to protect themselves from a world that is actually very scary for them. And I definitely acknowledge that pattern that I saw of them having highly narcissistic parents. And I was just like, oh, wow. And I've talked to friends who I'm cool with who have said, yeah, my dad's a narcissist or my mom's a narcissist. And I definitely recognize traits within myself. Like, I had one friend admit, you know what? Sometimes I actually just think I'm better than people just because. And I was like, oh, wow. And, just being able to admit that, recognize where it comes from, I think that's an awareness with narcissism where that probably won't break up friendships or romantic relationships that you have with other people, because you're able to tap into your narcissism, check it, recognize it, work on it. And so I know this sounds very, very strange, but I definitely do have this level of empathy for people who have unchecked, highly narcissistic tendencies. They are insecure, they are scared, they are on autopilot, and usually deep down there's a sense of longing and loneliness, because narcissism, while it is also a defense mechanism, it disconnects you from the world around you when it starts to lead into the unhealthy patterns of narcissism. You're so disconnected from yourself that how can you possibly connect with the people around you, feel the people around you, their emotions and how they're feeling when you don't even comprehend your own or check your own. I do feel like narcissism is like, we see it in children, we see it in babies. And I feel like that's why a lot of these people that I've encountered remind me of children, not in a condescending way. I'm saying that in the sense of they want something, they go get it, they don't ask. They want to leave the classroom and walk out, they get up and leave. They want to say they don't like your shirt, they just blurt it out and say, I don't like that shirt. They're not thinking of how this other person's feeling or what they're going through. They're hungry, they want a snack right now. No, not in 10 minutes, Lisa, I want the snack fucking now. They feel offended, they'll start crying or they'll have an outburst. Like, that's the level that I've seen. And there was this kind of light bulb in my head, like, they're kind of acting like a child. Like, this is very interesting. And I kind of put like a bookmark in that, because I'm like, you're acting like a little kid. And they're kind of people that are on this unhealthy side. They seem like very stuck little kids. Like, they never move past that stage as a child where you start to connect with the world and have a world view instead of a self view. You realize that there are certain ways to get your own needs without being manipulative. And then sometimes, okay, this isn't really a need, this is a want, so maybe I should, that they're not entitled to things just because. I want a toy. Okay, well, you can't have a toy. Oh, okay. And, being able to settle with that instead of screaming and throwing a fit and calling their mom a bitch because they can't have the toy. So it's really interesting, guys. I definitely have noticed my own narcissistic traits. Like I told you about being entitled. sometimes I have this inflated sense of self to cover my own. And that's another thing. Most narcissists are very insecure. I think people get, thrown off because their image is, I have it all together, I'm very confident, and whatever. And I'm not saying that people that are labeled as narcissists can't be confident, but I feel like when you're on, again, that unhealthy side, I feel like you're unhealthy because you're so insecure. I've met people who have a level of confidence, and self-love, who do have narcissistic traits, but there's still insecurities, there are little holes of insecurities there that are being protected by their narcissistic traits, right? So I'm very compassionate now. I'm not as judgmental towards these people. There was a minute where I'm like, you're the worst. Y'all are the worst people in the world. I was in such a victimhood. I wanted to keep going over the pain of this narcissistic abuse, and connect with this pain instead of dropping it, moving on, saying, this is something that happened. And now, to be very frank with you, I actually feel very powerful that I was able to survive mentally these narcissistic experiences. And then also the fact that I have these experiences, so I'm able to talk to other people about them. That's a new level of connection that I have with people because I've been through it. I've seen it. Like I said, I've seen the highest level. I've been in very close proximity with someone who I believe has narcissistic personality disorder. And so, now it's kind of like a superpower for me. I'm like, wow, I went through that experience and I'm grateful for that. I can say, guys, what a fucking healing moment right now that I'm able to say I am grateful for my experience of narcissistic abuse. Like, what? Because it's like now I'm able to see it in myself. I'm not saying I'm perfect and I'll never encounter it again. I really hope not. But, if I do, I'm able to understand what's happening to me and navigate the situation. Other people around me who have experienced it, I'm able to help them navigate through their situations and extend empathy to them. So, that's why my last two posts, some people may have been like, why is she talking about narcissism like this? Like, change of tune. Well, yeah, and it's because, and again, I'm not trying to make fun of or minimize the struggle, but I have seen a lot of narcissistic abuse groups where they're stuck in a loop that I almost was stuck in. They keep talking about what happened. My boyfriend did this. My dad did this. My mom was like this. Why were they like that? And you keep going around and going around instead of being like, what did this experience take away from me? And until I sat down and was like, Kiana, what did you think? What pain are you trying to soothe by telling this story over and over again? How were you actually hurt from this situation? And I was like, well, my agency and my sense of self was, my own agency and my own sense of self was tampered with just because somebody else couldn't control theirs. My self-esteem dropped. I felt not good enough. I felt like this person, attacked parts of me that I had built up and I was proud of. So I felt like they took away really good things from me, really good parts of me. And then I had to realize that I'm whole. Nothing's missing. Nothing's gone. You can always rebuild parts of yourself after you feel like they've been tampered with or broken. So I was giving the narcissist, quote, quote, too much power. I was giving someone who was not in control of their own life control of my life and my feelings. Because narcissism, unhealthy narcissism, is an attempt to balance control on the outside because they don't feel in control on the inside. Very deep psychological wounds a lot of unhealthy narcissists have. And so I was like, wow, I allowed their inner world to fuck up my inner world. And I'm saying aloud, like I'm not beating myself up when I'm saying aloud. I'm just, I'm having accountability and control by saying aloud. So I am very proud of myself on this journey. I am proud of myself that I have been able to move from a very dark, hurtful place as a victim, and now I'm feeling more like a victor, and I have control and I have power. And it's not in a condescending way when I say I really feel for people who struggle in their daily life with narcissism, because I truly do. They're so disconnected, y'all. I don't even know if you understand how disconnected the narcissist is. And on a soul level, I think they can feel it, but it's too much to feel. Like, and people say like, oh, narcissists, they don't go to therapy. Of course they don't go to therapy. They would probably have to have several mental breakdowns to get to the point of healing. And when you have kids, when you feel like you have an established life, when you have a job, when you just have a life, who has time for mental breakdowns? Who wants to go through that willingly, consciously? That's a lot of maturity and self-awareness to be like, it's a complete break. They have to break everything down. And I think I've talked about this before. They'd have to break everything down to rebuild up again. They'd have to go all the way back to their inner child, all the way back to that narcissistic parent, all the way back to and unravel all these defense mechanisms that they feel like they need to put up. And then also, on the other hand, practice empathy. I mean, you are not born being empathetic unless you're an empath. If you're a true empath, you are born with a level of empathy. But then here's the thing. I've met a narcissist who was highly empathic, but did not practice empathy. I'm going to say it again. I have met a narcissist because they'll say like, oh, narcissists don't have empathy. I disagree. I think a narcissist can have empathy, but if it's not being practiced, they're not going to show it. I have met a narcissist who can feel what other people are feeling, but they dismiss it. Right? So if it's being dismissed, of course I can't see it. So I'm going to assume that you're not an empathetic person, but I've seen it. I've seen them have empathy. I've seen them being able to pick up on what people can feel. They just don't care. That's what I've seen. I feel that I've seen them not care. And I feel like because if you struggle with your own feelings and getting in touch with your own, if you have trouble sitting with your own emotions, I'm not going to expect you to be able to sit with mine and empathize with mine. So that's another like myth that I've been reading, or not. I don't think it's a myth. I just think it's not a complete theory or development that narcissists don't have empathy. I'm like, it's a little more, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little more complicated than that. And it's just really funny. I actually wanted to go through, if I can pull it up, this article that I saw on, it's probably not going to be the same one, but okay. So here are some traits of narcissism that I can definitely, this is just a random article, right? It says female narcissistic traits: being self-centered or self-absorbed. Okay, I did that. Never admitting fault. Never, okay, not part that me. That's not me. Pettiness and inability to see the bigger picture. I've been there. Obsession with social status. I've been there. Addicted to social media. I wouldn't say I'm addicted, but I've definitely seen a narcissist that was addicted. Exploitative of others. Not me, but I've seen that. Being overly vain. I've been there. Using sex appeal to coerce others. I've done that. Seeming insecure, shy, or reserved. Yeah. Sensitive and reactive. Me, I can do that. Dependency and neediness. I've been there. Playing the victim card. Been there. Possessive, passive aggressive, and manipulative. Okay. I don't think I've been there on a consistent level. Bullying or being a mean girl. Yep. I've experienced that with other people. Instability in work life or relationships. to a degree. Oh my God, I'm sorry. My dog is barking like insane. So annoying. Is she done? Okay, she's done. But yeah, so, you can look at an article, and I would advise you to look at an article and see if you actually identify with some traits. I think it's, sorry, my mom's talking in the background. Oh my God. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this episode up. Y'all know I like to keep them short. So here's a short episode. I can expand on this later at a different time. I might collab with somebody on this. Thank you guys for being so supportive and patient with me. If you have any thoughts or comments about narcissism, your own experience, or what you think about looking at narcissism as a scale from healthy to unhealthy. Did you know that? Have you heard that before? What are your thoughts? Love y'all.